Speculation is ramping up at Trump Tower, where President-elect Donald Trump will hold more meetings this morning for potential cabinet positions. Former House Speaker Newt Gingrich also shed some light about the process. Listen to this.
The people who are at the center of the Trump world focus totally on winning, and the good thing they did, or they wouldn't have won. Now those same people are shifting gear. I think they were shifting about the team they wanted to build. For example, putting the vice president, exactly as Cheney was, in charge of the transition.
Trump is expected to talk with South Carolina's Nikki Haley and Florida Governor Rick Scott. They are expected to speak with Trump today. Fox News has learned that Governor Haley is being considered for a leading cabinet position. We want to bring in Herman Cain right now, former Republican presidential candidate. Good to see you, sir. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Maria. Happy to be with you.
What's your take so far on what we've heard from the transition team and from the cabinet being put together?
I believe that it's going well. Look, when you are putting together a whole brand new team, you're going to have to talk to a lot of people, which he is. There's going to be a lot of activity in and out of Donald Trump's office, which it will be. He put Vice President-elect Mike Pence in charge of it, which was smart for a couple of reasons. Number one, he's probably going to use Vice President Pence as someone, as a go-between between him and some of those cabinet members, because he can't be everywhere all the time. I think it's going well. Now, Newt Gingrich talked about their focus has shifted from winning to putting together a team. The liberal media is the one that hasn't done any shifting, because they are still trying to perpetuate those same negative words and labels of Donald Trump. That's where the shift needs to take place if they want to help this country.
Let me ask you about the so-called draining of the swamp, because the Trump transition team is imposing this 5-year lobbying ban for appointees after they leave government service. Let's talk about this, because if this is not pushed forward, certainly supporters will be upset. They want to make sure that there is no conflict.
Yes, I think that that is a good rule, and here's why. When you are a United States congressperson or a United States senator, you got your staff and others pulling at you, trying to influence you constantly. So someone that has an ulterior motive that becomes a lobbyist, it can confuse people. And so I happen to believe that that is a good rule.
Yeah.
When members of Congress get back to making decisions that they believe in their heart are the right decisions, I think that's one way of helping to drain the swamp.
Yeah, Tony, people want this to happen. They like this.
Yes.
Lobbyist ban.
When you look at the election result, unless you totally interpret this as a rebuke of the existing order in Washington, that includes, frankly, elements from both parties, then you've completely missed what happened here. And a big part of this is this permanent class filled with people like lobbyists who are not bad people. They're doing, in some cases, reasonably good work. But at the same time, there is an element where it does become a bit of a toxic relationship, because it doesn't ultimately help the average American. It helps the special interest groups. It helps a particular parochial interest, perhaps. But it doesn't ultimately help the country move in the right direction. I also would include into that the fact that Donald Trump has been one of the few who really has brought the idea of term limits back up again, which is something I wonder, Mr. Cain, if you think he'll get some traction on if he tries to push it forward with congressmen who may not want to term limit themselves.
I believe he will get some traction, but he's going to have to take the message directly to the American people to get the push from below the people, as well as him providing the political capital to make it happen. There are going to be a lot of long-time members of Congress who are going to push back, but if you got the people pushing up and Trump leading the charge, I think we've got a good chance of getting some great traction and maybe get something passed.
So, Herman, it's Steve Hilton here. We were going to do a double act, if I remember. Herman and Hilton, we talked about it. Taking it on the road. I just wanted to ask you about whether actually we should think about it beyond just lobbying. I certainly remember when I worked in 10 Downing Street with Prime Minister Cameron, that one of the big problems was not just lobbying, but also people working in government departments as civil servants and bureaucrats who then expected to get a job, not as a lobbyist, but actually working in one of the companies that was relevant to their business. For example, if you work in the Defense Department and you end up actually taking a job when you leave in one of the defense manufacturers, that's another element of this that I think needs to be looked at.
You're absolutely right, because The people who get a job with a company that they may have been lobbying for, the reason that that company might hire them is because that company views them as being able to influence the right people, the right committees, and the right members of Congress. That's not the way it is supposed to work. And so I absolutely agree. That is another downside. Here's another aspect of this whole draining of the swamp. Long-time federal employees, they're not bad people, but I used to be a federal employee. Too many of them will smile at the new secretary, or they'll nod their heads yes to the new president, and they won't change. They'll go right back to being a stonewall for anything that the new administration wants to do. So if that is the case, which is what Donald Trump is saying, we're not going to have that, you don't end up with solutions to problems. You end up with quasi-compromised, almost solutions. So draining the swamp, addressing what you mentioned, Steve, and what the other panelists mentioned is exactly what I happen to think is the right way to go.
And I think you're so right on that tendency in the bureaucracy to resist the change. And the thing that really encourages me about Trump's team, I think the person that most gets that and the need for real shakeup is actually Newt Gingrich himself, who we saw earlier. I think he's really motivated to shake up the whole federal bureaucracy and make big change happen.
That's ironic, though, too, given he's about as establishment-y as it gets. But we have heard that from him. We have.
Mr. Kennedy.
But let me comment on that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Newt Gingrich is one person who spent a long time in Congress. He was Speaker of the House, and he even commented to me at one point, the best thing he ever did was to leave Congress so he could look at it from the outside. So I wouldn't qualify him as a pure establishment guy. His eyes are now open because he's been on both sides for a long time.
Okay. Tony?
So, Mr. Kane, you've been both in public service and in private business. You're a very successful entrepreneurial businessman yourself. What kind of advice would you give Donald Trump, someone who comes to the presidency with the exclusive experience being in the private sector, probably will bring a refreshing attitude as a result to governing and managing, but what kind of advice would you give, considering you've been on both sides of the public and private kind of organization?
I would recommend to President-elect Trump to follow through on the top 3 things that he indicated that he wants to focus on initially, because they will be very visible to the business world. It will excite business leaders, and that is taxes, dramatically cutting taxes. He wants to also address the whole immigration issue, enforce the laws that are there. And let me just clarify something that the liberal media keeps messing up. He wants to start with getting rid of criminals. He has said nothing about yanking kids from their families. This is what I meant by the liberal media has not shifted yet from its campaign rhetoric.
You're absolutely
so he wants to do something tax. And then the third thing that'll be very visible, tee it up, repeal and replace Obamacare. I got to tell you, I know that he has a lot of things on his agenda, but those 3 alone would send a very strong message to the business community and families, as well as his supporters.
And I think you're right, though, because even when you watch the mainstream media, they're still so negative on Donald Trump. That's all they can do. And it's, I mean, the election's over, guys. All right, let me ask you this, because there's this story as well, Herman. Public schools in San Francisco may be teaching their students that Trump won the election by appealing to a racist and sexist base of voters, okay? A teachers' union reportedly offered the lesson plan to be taught in their classes. Take a look at this. The lesson plan states the following. Let us please not sidestep the fact that a racist and sexist man has become the president of our country by pandering to a huge racist and sexist base. Herman Cain, why aren't people just accepting the results of the election? It's not just the media. It's also academics. I mean, look at this. This is disgusting.
It is disgusting. And this union is doing a disservice to the teachers, which will be doing a disservice to the students if they teach that garbage. I believe that every parent in that school district needs to show up at a PTA meeting, go to that school, and insist that that garbage not be taught to their kids. Because, first of all, it's a lie. I was in corporate America for over 40 years. Most of the time, I worked in an environment where there were a lot of white people. I could spot a racist from across the room. Donald Trump is not a racist. I met him 5 years ago. Dr. Alveda King says he's not a racist. Dr. Ben Carson says he's not a racist. But you see, with the help of the liberal media who continue want to perpetuate this rhetoric, this is why unions have this messed up attitude. And you know what? Maybe this is one of the reasons, Maria, we have all of these sniveling snowflakes on college campuses because they're not learning enough in high school. So when they get on campus, they're looking for safe space.
I mean,
well, I tell you what.
Yeah. It's crazy. Well, I mean, what does the school have to say about the fact that 53% of white women voted for Trump? What does they have to say? 53%. Are 53% of white women sexist and racist? What about, you know, Hispanics?
More Hispanics
came
and
out
more African Americans than for the previous.
More African. I mean, even though African Americans didn't come out as much as people would have liked, they voted Trump.
This is a false narrative that was completely rejected by the electorate. And the more these organizations and people who can't get over and reconcile this election use this tactic, the more they disassociate themselves from the average American, which is why they lost in the first place.
You're absolutely right.
And one of the things that I've always talked about, Maria, is one of the tactics of the left, the Democrats, the progressives, whatever they want to call themselves today, is to ignore the facts. They want to ignore the fact that Donald Trump won. They want to ignore the fact about all of these other things.
Well, we will leave it on that note. Herman Cain, great to see you, sir. Thanks so much. We will be right back.
Happy to be with you.